President Trump has launched an economic Normandy campaign against Iran, so do you know how Iran is responding? I've told you all about an incredible achievement, which is the U.S. military escorting 9 million barrels of oil through the Strait of Hormuz every night. Is that true? Well, today I'll tell you the facts. The fact is, it's 10 to 20 million barrels, and it's been going on for 2 months already. What exactly is going on here? In such a narrow strait, right under Iran's nose, how could the US military possibly pull this off? And another thing, Trump announced the GOP is holding a national convention for the midterms, which is a first in 170 years. Why do this? This is the topic Fang Wei is bringing to you today. There's a lot of very interesting news today. All right, welcome to Good Morning America with Fang Wei. Hello to our YouTube viewers and to our listeners on Sound of Hope Silicon Valley FM 96.1. Okay, let's get into the main topic. Let's first talk about yesterday, when President Trump announced maximum pressure on Iran's economy, launching the harshest economic Normandy campaign in history, while warning all countries to stay away. If you give Iran a so-called transfusion, then the U.S. will hit you with severe sanctions. So what is Iran doing? Iran's foreign minister Arakchi responded by saying that doubling down on a failed policy will only lead to further failure and provoke Iranian hostility. Meanwhile, to evade America's so-called maximum pressure, Iran is desperately deepening its financial and military ties with Beijing and Moscow. So the first target is the BRICS organization, which is an economic group composed of Brazil, Russia, India, China, South Africa, and several recently expanded members. And then there's the Shanghai Cooperation Organization, led by the CCP, a Eurasian Political, Economic, and Security Alliance led by Beijing and Moscow, which has recently become two important vehicles for Iran's diplomatic expansion. Iran's central bank stated, the central bank governor said that Tehran will soon join the BRICS-backed New Development Bank. So Reuters rushed to ask the BRICS New Development Bank, will you be recruiting Iran into your ranks? The bank said we cannot confirm its membership status. What does that mean? Meaning, will they reject Iran? They might not necessarily reject them, but will they say, we'll just let them in? It's hard for them to answer because once they do, they'll immediately face U.S. sanctions. Okay, so another thing Iran is doing is repositioning itself, explicitly calling itself a key hub that directly challenges American influence. What does that mean? It means anyone who's anti-American, anyone who needs to be or wants to be, come to me. I'm supporting anti-American forces in the Middle East and worldwide, involving Russia, China, the CCP, and North Korea, among others. Now, in the current situation, Russia is providing Iran with ammunition, drone parts, explosives, and TNT via the Caspian Sea route. And the CCP is actually continuously and heavily supporting Iran. It's just that the specific details haven't been disclosed. The U.S. actually knows but hasn't said anything. And Iran, along with its allies, North Korea, Russia, and China, are simultaneously using cybercrime to launch a financial war against the U.S. online, with attacks on U.S. financial institutions now in full swing. A key issue here is that whether it's this maximum pressure on Iran or the economic Normandy campaign, it's mainly aimed at the CCP. In other words, is the CCP going to stand in opposition to the United States? Well, let me tell you, my direct view is that they wouldn't dare. They wouldn't dare. But will they comply with the U.S. and stop supporting Iran? Not likely. So the CCP will surely agree on the surface, but violate it underneath, just feigning compliance. So what will the U.S. do? Well, yesterday, U.S. Treasury Secretary Bessent issued a warning saying the U.S. will impose the toughest sanctions in history on Iran. He said he will hold a press conference next Monday to discuss and provide detailed specifics. Bessent is very confident. He said this is a series of measures that will work in Iran, and we will cause the Iranian regime to collapse. Now, regarding Iran's current situation, the IMF expects Iran's economy to shrink by 5% this year, the worst recession in nearly 40 years, with inflation near 80%. And Iran's currency, the rial, will soon hit an all-time low against the dollar, forcing many Iranians to borrow money just to buy daily necessities. Bessent said, we will completely destroy the economy of this murderous regime. At the same time, Bessent stated that the U.S. will seek a clear stance from all allies. You are either with us or you are against us. These words were mainly for the CCP and Russia, because Russia is currently preoccupied with the war in Ukraine and relies on the CCP itself. So the whole message is really intended for the CCP. Besson said if you insist on doing business with Iran, whether it's transfers, buying oil, or ship to ship transfers at sea, the U.S. Treasury and government will use all power and means to take enforcement action against you. Now is the time for our allies and other countries around the world to make a choice. So you can hear how serious this is. When he mentions transfers or buying oil, he's talking about the CCP. Because Russia doesn't buy Iranian oil, Russia can't even sell its own oil. So the one buying 80% of Iran's oil is the People's Republic of China. The CCP conducts ship-to-ship transfers at sea. It's as if Besson is issuing a solemn warning or a severe threat to him. Of course, he's also trying to be persuasive. He told the CCP that we are sure everyone wants the Strait of Hormuz reopened and energy prices to drop. He said, remember, 50% of China's energy comes from the Gulf region, so if they can cooperate with our process, it will be of great benefit to them. Great benefit. Let me translate for Besson. It means don't hurt others and yourself. If you oppose the U.S. just for the sake of it, you'll be the one who suffers in the end. Because indeed, the CCP is the world's largest oil importer, importing 10 million barrels a day. According to 2025 data, of the 10 million barrels the CCP imports, nearly 2 million are from Iran. That means 80% of Iran's total seaborne oil goes to the CCP. 2 million barrels. The key is it's all super cheap. Since Iranian oil is sanctioned, it can't be sold or bid on in the open market, so it can't fetch a high price. This is just very cheap. Now it's all back to zero. The CCP can't get this oil because the U.S. military has it blocked. The CCP is facing a dilemma. On one hand, they don't want the U.S. to win, so they must support Iran to resist and drain U.S. energy and focus. On the other hand, the more Iran resists, the harder it is for the CCP. As the world's top oil importer, how does the CCP feel about the Gulf being in such a state? Every blow dealt to Iran is really a blow to themselves, you know? So Besson is highlighting the benefits for the CCP to guide them away from opposing the U.S. as it does them no good. Will it work? It might for a normal country, but for the CCP, it's hard to say. First, opposing the U.S. is their top ideological priority. They'd rather suffer losses than stop. Another variable is that the CCP's oil imports are down over 30% from last year by 5 million barrels. We know Iran's oil is gone, but that's only 2 million barrels. There's another 3 million the CCP just isn't buying. So what's the reason for that? I've analyzed one possibility before. The CCP is choosing not to buy and is using its reserves instead. I don't think so. The second is the economic slowdown. They just don't need as much oil. If the CCP doesn't need that much oil anyway, then Besson's advice is useless, right? Anyway, let's look at this. All these moves have one major goal, which is to target international crude oil prices. Now, oil prices have hit a 3-week high. Brent crude is up to $94 and US WTI is up to $88. A reporter asked him, well, oil prices are rising. What do you have to say about that? And what did Besson say? He said, I think the oil market has misunderstood the meaning of our economic pressure. He said, there's an information asymmetry. I'm not sure why oil prices will be rising. If we apply maximum economic pressure, it means we won't have a large-scale military conflict. Let me translate for Besson. What's wrong with you guys? Our economic war means no military war, so stop worrying. Oil prices should be going down, so why are they going up? Of course, having said that, an economic Normandy means confrontation, doesn't it? Confrontation? Who knows where that leads in the end? Could it lead to a full-blown fight again? So the market is naturally tense, which is why it rose, but only by $2 to 94, right? So it's not exactly normal. You declare a Normandy-style battle, and it only goes up $2. I'm not surprised. But Besson thinks it should be dropping, not rising. That's his real point. Anyway, with the market being so jumpy, the final oil price will depend on supply and demand. Okay, the next story is major and quite shocking. Many couldn't believe it, but it seems to be true. The U.S. military is escorting hundreds of thousands of barrels of oil through the Strait of Hormuz every night. It's hard to believe. I reported this Monday. The U.S. Fifth Fleet is escorting 9 million barrels of oil out of the strait every single night. This information comes from a reporter at Israel's Channel 14. I said at the time that this was possible, but I couldn't confirm it. Well, as of today, multiple outlets have confirmed it, citing U.S. military sources. It's almost unbelievable. Even Trump hasn't said much about it, and people still doubt it. So, what is it? Every night, the U.S. military escorts 10 to 20 million barrels of crude oil out of the Strait of Hormuz. We all know that before the war, the throughput of the Strait of Hormuz was 20 million barrels. After the war started, it was cut off. Since then, a large amount of oil, about 7 million barrels, has gone through Saudi Arabia's east-west pipeline across the Arabian Peninsula to the Red Sea for shipping. Additionally, 4 land pipelines are under construction. 2 lead to the Mediterranean coast, and another goes through the Oman Peninsula south of the Strait of Hormuz. It just bypasses the strait entirely by going across the land nearby. However, Axios, a U.S. media outlet, has a detailed report. Let me give you a brief overview of the situation. 2 U.S. officials told Axios that even though the war is still at a stalemate, the U.S. military has quietly established a shipping corridor in the Strait of Hormuz, transporting over 10 million barrels of oil daily for 2 months now. How'd they do it? It's operated by the U.S. Army headquarters at Fort Bragg in North Carolina. Every night, they contact the supertankers that need to enter or exit the strait to arrange their transit, including who goes first, the order, and your position in line. They divide each night into 2 segments. The first half might be for tankers full of oil to exit the Strait of Hormuz through the southern channel. The second half is for empty ships waiting in the Arabian Sea to enter the strait. Of course, it didn't specify. It could be the other way around, but either way, the night is split into 2 plots. While they sail, U.S. fighter jets and helicopters provide escort. These tankers, with their transponders and lights off in the pitch black, are guided through the strait by the U.S. military. In the last round of U.S. strikes along the coast, Iran's radars were mostly blinded. Now they only have a few hastily rebuilt radars and speedboats with small radars searching for tankers passing through. So simply put, Iran is blind. They have to rely on visual sightings or even binoculars to guess if ships are entering or exiting the strait. You know, at night, can you really see anything 20 or 30 kilometers away with binoculars? It's almost impossible to see. If you send out small boats, they'll just be hit by the US military. So Iran's current method is just blind firing. Their drones and missiles have no specific targets. They just launch them in a general direction. Of course, firing without a target makes it hard to hit anything, and most are intercepted by the U.S. military escorts. In just the first half of this week, U.S. forces shot down 8 Iranian drones and 2 cruise missiles. So, any reports of a tanker being hit are just cases of Iran getting lucky once in 1,000 tries. The vast majority of ships are moving in and out every day. A U.S. military spokesperson said they've controlled the southern channel of the Strait of Hormuz for 2 months. The IRGC might cause trouble, but they don't control the strait. We do. This is according to a U.S. official with direct knowledge of the matter. So he said that for the past 2 weeks, 15 to 20 tankers have been passing through the southern channel near Oman every night, entering and leaving the Strait of Hormuz. And the average daily export volume is continuing to grow, and it's now approaching 10 million barrels. But on certain nights over the past few weeks, depending on how the scheduling worked out, sometimes, on some nights, the amount of oil shipped out of the Gulf reached 15 million or even 20 million barrels. He said that just this week, on one night, over 20 ships were scheduled through the southern channel, potentially moving 15 million barrels of oil out of the strait. So President Trump also started speaking out on Wednesday. He told Axios that, yes, that's the case. Large amounts of oil are being shipped out of the Strait of Hormuz. He said that currently, the U.S. is not negotiating with Iran, and that talking to them is a total waste of time. That's what he's saying now. Well, everyone, I think this is a great example of President Trump's experience gained from real-world practice. He knows that talking to them is useless. Then President Trump concluded by saying that Iran still has a little resistance left, but overall, they're just an empty shell. Okay, let me give you Fang Wei's commentary. I'll say this. First of all, I think the Trump team, and I'm not trying to flatter anyone, I'm a media person. I don't even call myself a Trump fan, and I don't see myself that way. But objectively speaking, the Trump team is a very hardworking and very smart team. They are constantly finding ways. It's an excellent team. So, if the above situation is true, and if you ask me, I believe it is true, it means that moving forward, Trump has actually solved the problem of oil transportation through the strait. So Trump won't start a large-scale war before the midterms. Therefore, U.S. gas prices, which deeply affect the midterms, will basically, from now until the midterms, while they might not drop much, they shouldn't rise much either. It's a stable situation. But the fact that oil prices aren't falling is still a huge threat to Trump. So, what about the Republican midterms? Okay, that's the next topic. The first ever Republican convention in the history of the midterms. What's the situation? President Trump made a high profile announcement on Wednesday that the Republican National Convention for the midterms will be held in Dallas, Texas on September 9th and 10th. He said it will be an unprecedented gathering. Republicans from all over our great country will gather to celebrate our huge victories and achievements, showcase our outstanding candidates, and prepare for the most important midterm elections in history. Our MAGA movement is bigger, better, and stronger than ever before. We will celebrate this massive and completely unprecedented success. We will win the midterms, protect and cherish our country, and make it greater than ever before. Please be sure to attend on September 9th and 10th. Well, so what's the big deal about these midterms? Let me tell you what the big deal is. Okay, the Republican Party has never held a national convention for the midterms. When I say never, what do I mean? In the 172 years since the Republican Party was founded in 1854, this is the first time in history. So the Republican National Convention always happens in election years, every 4 years. Actually, the first real national convention didn't start until 1856, 2 years after the Republican Party was founded in 1854. Then in 1860, that was the second one, and Lincoln won, becoming the leader of the Republican Party. So people often say the GOP is the party of Lincoln, and it started from that year. Then Lincoln was elected president the following year and led the United States through the Civil War. So from 1856 until today, for about 170 years, the quadrennial Republican Convention has never been interrupted. It wasn't interrupted by the Civil War, World War I, World War II, or the pandemic. Though the pandemic one was remote, this still happened. Okay, so the Republican National Convention, held every 4 years, has never been interrupted, but there's never been one for the midterms. So why make an exception and hold a national convention for these midterm elections? I'll get to that. First, let's talk about what's actually on the ballot in this year's midterms. This year, first of all 435 seats in the House are up for election. They're all refreshed every 2 years. That's how the House works, with 2-year terms. Secondly, there are 35 Senate seats up, which is about a third. It was originally 33, but then there's Vance, right? The senator from Ohio resigned to become vice president. Florida Senator Marco Rubio resigned to become Secretary of State, so there are special elections for both. That makes it 33 plus 35 plus 2 seats, totaling 35 seats. If things stay as they are, the Republicans have to defend 22 seats, while the Democrats only have 13. Republicans have more to defend, which is a disadvantage. The Democrats need to flip 4 seats to gain a majority and take control of the Senate. So from the current 22 to 13, the final result would need to be 18 to 17 for the Democrats to take the Senate. That's the situation for the Senate race. Then next, there are the governors. 39 states and territories will be electing their governors or heads of government. So many governors are elected during the midterms. That's their big election year, not during the presidential election. And then there are 88 state legislative chambers. You might say the U.S. only has 50 states, so how are there 88? Well, remember that most states have 2 chambers, so 50 states times 2 would be 100, right? Out of those 100 state chambers, 88 are up for election, plus 5 in U.S. territories. So most state legislatures are elected during the midterms. Plus, there are mayoral elections in some major cities, like Los Angeles and Washington, D.C. Those will be held as well. Then there are 37 states with a total of 100 ballot initiatives or referendums. Now, let me clarify. The U.S. doesn't have national referendums, but many individual states do. So when I say there are no referendums in the U.S., I mean the federal government doesn't have them. There's no nationwide referendum. All right, so what's the current state of the race? Let's start with the Senate. Right now, there are 19 in the Senate. There are three swing states. Three swing states. As you know, if there are only three swing states, it's going to be very hard for the Democrats to flip 4 seats. So things aren't looking very good for the Democrats. As for the House, there are 19 swing states for the Democrats. So, as you know, the Republican House, well, they only lead by about 4 seats, but now there are 19 pure swing states. So this point is really, truly very difficult. This means Republicans must hold 15 states, 15 districts, holding 15 out of 19 swing districts. So the House is quite a tosser. Now, how many swing governorships are there? 4 swing governorships, swing states, that's the situation, roughly the situation. So where does the risk lie? Let's first talk about the midterms. What happens if the Republicans lose? What do the midterms mean for both sides? For Democrats, first, it's incredibly frustrating because every one of Trump's policies is reversing Obama's and Biden's policies. They've been so angry these past 2 years, so they're determined to flip Congress. For Republicans, if they lose one chamber, then Trump's new policies will end. Because of the separation of powers, any bill must pass both houses of Congress and be signed by the president. If they lose one chamber, it means new policies can't move forward. They can only follow the established rules. Whatever policies are in place now will just be executed for the remaining 2 years. And then there are things that need congressional funding. No, funding matters will come to a halt. For example, the war against Iran, if you keep fighting, they won't give you money. These are exceptions. There's no prior budget. So every time it reaches a point where money is needed, they ask Congress. If Congress blocks you because they don't want war, they can't stop the president from fighting, but they can stop the president from getting the money for war. So the Iran war would likely be forced into a compromise. Furthermore, if they lose both chambers, Trump will definitely be impeached. Of course, will the impeachment succeed? Well, it certainly won't succeed, but it will consume 30 to 50% of the Trump team's energy. It depends on whether they lose one chamber or both chambers. So, because it's not just impeaching the president, they'll summon many of the president's team to what's called congressional hearings, which is a huge distraction. Now, if Republicans only lose the House, there will still be an impeachment. Trump will be impeached, but it won't happen in the Senate. So the trouble is basically cut in half. That's the situation. So simply put, policies end, certain costly projects are forced to stop, and there's massive governance interference. That's the result if Republicans lose either chamber. Now, for Trump and the Republicans, they believe this is the only 4-year window to completely reverse America's direction and return to tradition. Only 2 years have passed. They really need the remaining 2 years. So for this reason, they're holding this big meeting. Because why hold this big meeting, right? Because first, the risk is too high now. If they can't win the midterms, the impact on the Republican Party would be too great. Second, the opposition party usually wins the midterms, 2 reasons. Why is that? One is that voter turnout is 20 percentage points lower than in the general election. We all know the 2020 U.S. turnout was 66%, meaning out of 100 voters, 66 are willing to vote, while the other 30-some, you just can't find them. And then in the midterm elections 2 years later, it became 46%, a 20% gap. It's just that many people aren't interested. So in 2024, the turnout was 64%, and this time it might be 40-some% again. The key is who doesn't show up, who's not interested. The team that lost the general election or the party that lost the presidential election usually bides their time, works hard, and is eager to try again. So they basically all come out to vote. But the party that won the general election might be indifferent, which leads to them losing their advantage due to carelessness. So in the past 70 plus years, 92% of the president's party lost in the midterms. So it's almost a guaranteed loss. But President Trump said we can't afford to lose. Now is America's only chance. Okay, so that's why Trump is holding this Republican National Convention, the first such instance in 170 years of midterm elections, which is why the situation for this midterm is so risky for the Republican Party. So it's essential to get every single Republican vote out throughout the entire process. That's the point of this midterm convention. I'll announce again that Fang Wei and Xin Tian will head to Dallas for full coverage and reporting, bringing you the latest updates from the Republican National Convention. Okay, stay tuned to Fang Wei time, right? Stay tuned to Fang Wei time. Hit the notification bell so you won't miss these midterm election programs. Okay. Now let me see. Y'all know how to subscribe, right? Okay. So what has President Trump done lately? Now Trump's deputy White House chief of staff, Steve Miller, has come out and appeared frequently in the media to explain Trump's achievements. Let me list them for you. Steve Miller is Trump's strategist and a very good speaker. So he said that after Trump took office, he closed the US Mexico border in a year and a half with almost no crossings for 15 months and said over 3 million illegal immigrants were deported or left voluntarily. Second, he rebalanced trade with Canada. Third, he rebuilt American manufacturing to end reliance on Chinese communist manufacturing. Fourth, he forced NATO countries to pay their own military costs and stop over relying on the US. Fifth, he maintained peace on the Korean Peninsula. Sixth, he overthrew the Venezuelan dictator Maduro. Seventh, he stopped Iran from getting nuclear weapons and threatened Israel in the Middle East. Eighth, he unleashed American energy production. Ninth, he controlled inflation in the United States. 10th, continuous tax cuts and deregulation. 11th, he cracked down hard on drug traffickers and reduced drug imports into the U.S. Now, for the latest news, the U.S. Centers for Disease Control, the CDC, released data showing fentanyl-related deaths plummeted in a year, dropping 22% last year. That is to say, deaths from synthetic opioids, including fentanyl, dropped from 49,000 in 2024 to 38,000 in 2025, a decrease of 11,000 people. During the same period, the total number of drug overdose deaths fell by 14%, from 81,000 in 2024 to 70,000 now. The Trump White House credits this to border enforcement operations, the plan to target drug cartels, and the arrest of convicted fentanyl smugglers. These measures have helped reduce the number of deaths caused by fentanyl. At the same time, another figure for the 2025 fiscal year shows that national fentanyl seizures fell by 45% from the previous year, nearly half. The government sees this as evidence that the upstream supply chain was hit by the U.S. and its allies, reducing the amount of drugs reaching the border. If the upstream is hit, the downstream flow narrows. Meanwhile, the Department of Justice has filed fentanyl-related charges against 8,000 defendants. As you know, 10 years ago, at the peak of the fentanyl crisis, 80 to 100,000 people died each year, mostly young people, from fentanyl. White House spokesperson Lauren Bliss said that thanks to President Trump, the U.S. is finally winning the battle against fentanyl. Let me briefly explain fentanyl. It comes from CCP chemical plants and has three very terrifying characteristics. First, fentanyl isn't grown like cocaine or heroin. It's synthetic, manufactured in CCP chemical factories. So first, production is guaranteed for an infinite supply. Second, because it's not a crop, it doesn't depend on the weather, so the price is extremely low. The hardest thing about drugs before was that they were expensive, right? But fentanyl is incredibly cheap. Third, its toxicity is off the charts. It's not like traditional drugs. Fentanyl is far more toxic than traditional drugs, about 50 times stronger than heroin and 100 times stronger than morphine. So it has become the #1 threat to young drug users in America. As I said before, this fentanyl from the CCP is essentially an opium war against America. The CCP makes the precursors, doing 90% of the work, leaving the last 10% for Mexican and Latin American cartels to process and smuggle into the U.S. to avoid responsibility. Trump has now taken a multi-pronged approach. First, pressuring the CCP upstream. Second, eliminating drug lords midstream. And third, targeting transport routes downstream by sea, air, and land, along with strict border control. This has led to a massive drop in fentanyl imports and a rapid decline in deaths among young Americans. Then, Stephen Miller mentioned another point. Trump is rebuilding the GOP. He said Trump is the greatest Republican leader since Lincoln, bringing the working and middle classes into the party and making the GOP their home. It's the party of traditional America. Those who identify with that vision now identify with the Republican Party.